The second portion of our project will be constructing the triangular ridges, the secondary ridges, and the developmental grooves. So as we can see, we completed the fish mouth structures. The teeth look like as they should. Maxillary molars are rhomboidal in shape. The mandibular molars are more or less rectangular. So we are ready to start building the triangular ridges. We're going to start building the triangular ridges on the maxillary teeth. We already have the contacts on the marginal ridges, so the next contacts we'll be trying to get are the contacts on the triangular ridges. So let's go a little bit closer. We have to make sure that we control the heat. As we can see, this heat here is a little bit too much, so we need to decrease it. So as we can see, we heated up the wax a little bit too much, so what we're going to do is we're going to scrape it out and start fresh. So now we have to be more careful with the heat. Just place a dot or wax on the bottom, and we're going to drag it up, this time being careful with how much heat we put down. Any wax that we put down that we didn't intend to, we can just take away. So then we can close the articulator and check to see if we have contact. And we can see here we do have contact, it's just a little bit too much, so we're gonna take some of the wax away and we're gonna just melt it a little bit more. And by melting it more, we take away a little bit with the instrument, as well as smoothing out the triangular ridge. Now don't pick up any additional wax with the instrument, because what we want when we have too heavy a contact is we want to take away just a little bit of wax to decrease that contact. So as we can see here, we have a slight contact right in this area here. So we will move on to the next triangular ridge on the second premolar. Again, we go to the center line and we put down a little bit of wax. This will allow us to place more wax more more easily. So we'll place it down. Again, too much heat. So can get a little bit frustrating, but it's easy enough to take away the wax. Again, we must pay attention and control the heat. You can blow on it a little bit. Once it sets, we can adjust the wax a little. We have to make sure that the bottom portion of the triangular ridge is the wider portion. So we close it again, and this time we have the perfect amount of contact right down in that area there. Now we move on to the mover. This is where that area comes in, where if we didn't lay down that thin layer of wax enough, we have more of a problem laying down the triangular ridge wax. So we go to the central groove and we bring up the triangular ridge right to the cusp tip. And we can have the triangular ridge move kind of towards the central pit. And again, we'll close it. And looks like we don't have contact yet, but we will soon. Just have to add a little bit more. And there we go. We can see the contact. But the contact is right in this area, right towards the central fossa. So we are moving on to the distal buccal triangular ridge, and this one will be facing the oblique ridge. So the oblique ridge should run right into this triangular ridge. And a little bit of too much heat there, so I just scraped away a little bit of wax here. So once I scraped it away, we're going to heat it up and smooth it out a little bit more. And since we know that our cusp tip is going into the central fossa, we're going to make sure that the contact from the opposing cusp will be on the mesial portion of that triangular ridge. Okay, so we don't have contact yet, so we're going to build it up a little bit more. Right here. Okay, so we don't have contact yet, but if we notice our cusp, it's getting a little bit high in this area here. Right there, you see? If we look at it from the anterior aspect, we can see that this cusp tip is starting to get a little high. So what we're going to do is, instead of building it too high into the opposing occlusion, what we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit to the distal buccal cusp of the lower mandibular molar. So let's get some of that blue wax. So let's get some of that blue wax, and we're going to add a little bit to this distal buccal cusp. But we're not going to add to the height. We're just going to add to the buccal portion of the cusp tip, and also the buccal portion of the cusp itself. Once we did that, then we can go back to the triangular ridge on the maxillary, soften it up a little bit, and we're going to close the occlusion. And it looks like we need to add a little bit more to the buccal portion of the lower tooth. If we add too much to the height, we're going to be higher than the adjacent tooth, and that will not be good because it violates the curve of speed. So now we added as much as we could, so now we're going to go back to the maxillary, and we're gonna increase the size of that triangular ridge and to try to put it into occlusion. We just need a hair more. And we have contact. Okay, so the next set of triangular ridges we're going to do on the lower. Now the mandibular lingual triangular ridges will contact the upper cusps on their lingual portion, and the triangular ridges are on the buccal portion of the lingual cusps on the lower, right here. So let's start adding. Oops. Alright, let's take some of this away. Here we have to control the heat extra carefully because it's such a small cusp. And let's see if we have contact. Yeah, we do have contact right there, but it's a little bit too strong, so we're gonna take away a little bit. gonna smooth it again with the heat. Make sure we don't put too much heat on it. And contact again. Still a little heavy. A little bit more. Now we took away a little too much. We're gonna add just a little bit. Be okay. Now we're gonna move on to the second premolar. Remember, the second premolar, the mesiolingual cusp is the larger one, so it's going to have a slightly larger triangular ridge. Not quite that large. Let's take this out. Slowly start. Okay, that's better. Okay. Let's see. Contact is not quite there, so we're going to look at it lingually to see if it is possible to add some contact there. As we can see in there, I think it might be possible if we bring out that lingual contour a little bit to the distal, to the mesial. We bring out that lingual contour to the mesial, we can get closer, and maybe we'll bring in the lingual contour of the upper, the lower. We might be able to gain some contact. So we're going to add to the mesial portion of the upper tooth, because that's where the contact is going to be. So we're going to add a little bit right here. And bring this out towards the lingual. Okay, so we're gonna bring the lingual contour in over here a little bit. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna do is add a little bit to the cusp ridge to correct the shape a little bit. And let's see if we can get some contact there. Not yet, so we have to add a little bit more. Looks like we're almost there. We just have to add a little more to the mesial portion of the maxillary. Alright, so let's add a little more to the triangular ridge, and we should be almost there. Yes, so now we have a little contact area. Right here. See if we can get this in focus. It's right there. Alright, so next one we'll move on to the distal triangular ridge. And again, this one is a little small, so we have to be careful with the heat. Bring it a little bit wider by the central groove. Check for contact. And looks like we smushed it right here. So that means our cusp tip. Let's see if it's our cusp tip hitting there. Because if it is, we're gonna have to get that cusp tip a little bit more towards the center. And if we see it right here, this cusp tip right there is hitting right into the triangular ridge, and we don't really want it to hit all the way out there. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring this in more so that we can get the cusp tip closer to the central fossa of this little tooth. So what we're going to do is we're going to smooth this out a little bit. Correct the shape, make sure it's triangular. Let's see where we're touching now. It's still kind of touching in that area there. But it is closer to the center of the tooth, so we're gonna leave it. I'm gonna smooth it out a little more. Now it's not touching at all, so we're gonna add just a little this bit. Okay, so now we have contact there. I'm gonna go to the mesiolingual triangular ridge. So we're going to start right in the central lobe. I mean the central bit right there. So make sure I don't overheat the wax again. I know I sound like I'm repeating myself, but we kind of have to think about it all the time, because sometimes we can easily forget that our heat needs to be in control. So I like to take this, the mesiolingual triangular ridge on the lower, take it right to the central pit. I overdid it a little bit right here, so I'm gonna take this away because we'll need this space for maybe a secondary groove or secondary lobe. So we want to make sure that we're only putting wax where we want to put it. Don't just move on if you accidentally put wax somewhere where you didn't need it. Just kind of take it away and smooth out the rest of the wax. And if we notice, just let's use the tendency of the wax to be round when it's molten. That way we create natural shapes. So we have a contact there, which is exactly where we want it. So we're going to decrease it in size a little bit by just carving away from around that contact. Don't carve the contact away. Then we're going to take our instrument, we're going to heat it up and smooth it down, and at the same time it will take some of the wax away. And it's still a little bit too hard, so let's take a little more wax, round it out again. And that should be okay. It looks like we kind of picked up a little bit from it, so let's fill that in. Sometimes the opposing contact, when the wax is too molten, it tends to take a piece out by sheer adhesion, and then we end up with a shy contact. So always check the opposing to make sure you don't have any wax on it. Best thing to do is wait till the shine goes away before you close the articulator. So now we have a perfect contact right here. So we move on to the distal lingual triangular ridge. And people have a tendency sometimes to make like an opposite triangle by trying to make the triangular ridge like this. So if you tend to do that, just realize that you do need to widen the bottom portion. So that the triangle doesn't look like an upside down triangle. And the bulk on the triangular ridge should be towards the central groove. Okay, now we have that contact right there. So we're going to, I feel it's a little bit too hard, so let's take away a little bit more. The tendency is, if we don't get a contact that's just right, the tendency is that eventually the arches start opening up, because each subsequent contact you add will tend to be a little bit higher than the other one. So it's important that we make the contacts just slight contacts and not a very prominent stamped contact into that wax. we still need to hear that stone. And making sure that the articulator is always nice and tight. So now we have the contacts on the lingual, and we have the contacts on the buccal triangular ridges. Now we're going to move on and do the lingual on the upper, and we're going to do the buccal triangular ridges on the lower. So let's try to do it on the lower first, and we're kind of going to try to do an ideal size triangular ridges, because at this point we do not have triangular ridges on the upper yet either, so those areas are kind of empty, and those empty areas come together. So we kind of have to make one side ideal. Either we start on the upper lingual triangular ridges, or we start with the mandibular buccal triangular ridges. So I decided to start on the buccal, so we're going to do it very carefully, and we're going to add triangular ridges there. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to thin out the fish mouths a little bit to give myself a little bit more room, so we're not fighting for room all the time. That should be enough. I have to try not to connect the two triangular ridges, but if we do, we can always carve a central groove in between them. This is what we want to end up. If we take a look at the tooth from the anterior view, we can see the V shape between the two triangular ridges. So they kind of meet in the middle, but they do not flow into each other. we float together a little bit. If we float together a little bit, we can always separate them with a sharp instrument. Then we can smooth out the ridge. You can close it just to make sure everything goes together. So now we're going to move on to the molars. The molars will be similar. And we're going to have the triangular ridges kind of going toward the central pit. So we can kind of draw a line if you want towards the central pit, and then start at the bottom, widening out the triangular ridge and kind of adding wax starting with the central developmental groove area. And be super careful with the heat, because at this point it's very easy to get everything molten. Again, we're going to close it to make sure that everything touches. And it looks like it's not touching anything, which is what we expect, because we don't have any triangular ridges yet on the top, or the maxillary, I should say. We should always use proper terminology, and that includes me. Now it's a little bit more challenging if you're using a flame, but you can do the exact same thing with a flame waxer as well as an electric waxer. Now electric waxers, some of them are made differently. Like this one, I just basically touch the ring to heat it, so I can actually cool it at the same time. But as long as you control the heat in any means you want, like blowing on it or something, you can do literally the exact same thing. Okay, let's see. Make sure it's close. Okay, now let's move on to the vistobuccal triangular ridge. Now this is the smallest cusp, so it's going to be the smallest ridge on this tooth. Actually, it's the distal triangular ridge. The vistobuccal triangular ridge is the one before it. Make sure that this doesn't get in the way. Okay, So we're done with this, so now we're going to go back over it, and we're going to just kind of idealize everything to where we think it should be. The distal buccal is usually a pretty good size triangular ridge there, so we'll just add a little bulk to it. And the next thing we're gonna do is we're going to just take our tool and kind of separate everything. And make it look nice. Sometimes it can get a little bit difficult to keep everything separate just by the heat, especially when we are so cramped with our space here. So we gotta consider where our developmental grooves are. So we kind of go over our little cusps and make sure that our developmental grooves are running in the right direction. So we will let's put a tiny little bit of a triangular ridge right here in the mesial, since we have a little room. Although it's not gonna contact anything, it's kind of nice. So we have all our little anatomy here. So the next thing we're gonna do is we're going to start with the upper. So the maxillary, we are going to do the lingual triangular ridges. So here we're gonna have to be a little bit more careful, because since we idealized the lower, now we're going to have to pay attention to where our contact's going to touch. So we're gonna start with the premolars, and we're gonna start with the first premolar. Very carefully controlling the heat. Close it up. Let's wait a little bit till the shine goes away, and then we'll close it. Almost there. Let's get the focus a little bit better. Alright, so we'll add a little bit more, not too much. You gotta be careful with that, because we're gonna end up smashing the cusp. We'll blow on it a little to go a bit faster, and there we are. We have contact right there. So let's lighten up on this contact a little bit. And let's make this triangular ridge a little bit narrower towards the cusp tip. And then we'll smooth it out again. Making sure everything is good. Let's zoom out a little bit. To the second premolar. Blend it a little bit. Check the contact. And we got contact. Do we have contact? Not yet. Now we have contact. Perfect. You always have to pay attention to the other contacts. Make sure that nothing is keeping our model open. Next one is going to be the mesiolingual triangular ridge or the maxillary first molar. And this one we're going to continue right to the central pit. Ooh, that's not nice. Let's take that away. With this exercise, let's try to keep things neat, so always take away the wax that you don't want in a specific place. So we're gonna go back and do it over. Let's make a line. Go straight. We'll avoid that. It's still a little bit too hot. That's why we're doing this. Gotta make it a little bit colder. Keep doing it. Keep doing it. Just try to pick up a little bit more wax. Maybe we can control the temperature a little more. Just like that. And then we're gonna widen the bottom. Too much heat. This one we can just take away and then smooth it. Then add a little more. Heat is key. Just a couple of degrees makes a big difference. Okay, let's try it. And we have contact right there. So we have 1, 2, 3. Next one is going to be the distal lingual triangular ridge, which is also very small, and most of the time it has no contact with anything. So now we have contact here, 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 and here. The next contact is we're gonna pick up is with the oblique ridge here, but we're gonna have to use the green wax to make that ridge a little bit bigger. And then we shall see whether we get contact. Can double check the back of it and see if it is at all possible. It should be possible to get it. Let's add a little bit more. So we got a fairly heavy contact right on the lingual here. So that the contact from that lingual is coming from this triangular ridge right here on the mesiolingual. So we're just going to lighten that up and smooth it out. That's our previous contact, probably actually from that triangular ridge. but since this wax here is harder than when we were waxing that one, it only made an indent in the mandibular. So let's go a little bit more with this oblique ridge. Let's bring it up a little higher here. Maybe we can pick up a contact. Who knows? And there we go, perfect. Right here. And we're gonna go and build up the distal lingual right here. Some green to increase the height a little bit. We'll see if we can get contact on that one. And we couldn't get contact, but we don't want to go any higher than that because that's about the same height as the second molar there. You see? Alright, so now we have the triangular ridges in. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to try to get the secondary ridges and the secondary anatomy in. So we'll start with the lower teeth. I have to clean out some of this wax that may have fallen in there. And this time we're going to use the blue wax again. And in some of these areas we're just going to puddle it in because there's not a lot of room to build secondary anatomy. Some places we could even scoop it out a little bit more to give us some room. Just be careful not to touch the marginal ridge contacts. So here's one of our secondary ridges in blue. Let's get a little closer here. Again, it's the heat that is the key to all of these. It's kind of difficult sometimes from the position, so we have to kind of try out different positions that are comfortable. We still have to close them so that we can make sure that our contacts don't interfere. Incidentally, I picked up another contact right in that area there, so that's a good exercise there. It's all about control. Now on the lingual of this tiny tooth, we're not even going to try adding secondaries there. We're just going to puddle it in right here with some blue wax. And the same over here. This here we have a little bit of a gap there, so I'm going to try to fill that in. Just have to be careful, if we heat it up too much, we're going to melt this little secondary anatomy there. So after we puddled it in, we refine our developmental grooves. This is our marginal groove right here. Do our mesial marginal groove. Places that have voids, we very quickly kind of seal it up with heat. Remember to close the articulator every time. I picked up another contact right here, so it's pretty heavy, so we can actually carve this down a little and remelt it a little bit. Then close it again, so we have a little tiny contact. And then we can puddle in that groove so it's not so sharp. It's like a quick pass with the instrument, and it seals it right up. So now we move on to the molar. I like to do it first. We do the buccal, then we do the lingual. It's a good way to do it, to move along quicker. Let's close it, make sure there's nothing touching. We also make sure that we have contact with the opposing. These areas I just add a little bit right here. You just have to make sure we stop at the buccal developmental groove, and then we add on the other side, and we have to be careful of the same thing. If you end up flowing the two together, it's no big deal, just like I just did, because then we just wait for it to cool, and then we take our Hallenbach carver and make sure we put in our buccal developmental groove right there, and it should be contiguous with the grooves that are made by the triangular ridges. And we do the same thing here. Just kind of puddle these areas in. I got nice contacts there, so we want to make sure we keep them. And we put in our developmental groove here. Any voids we seal up very quickly with a hot instrument, just so it doesn't look like a hole. And then we move on to the lingual portion. I think here I could make a little ridge, so that's a mesiomarginal groove. So we'll make a little secondary ridge right there. Then we close it. Looks like nothing's in the way, so we'll just continue. And we fill in this area here, and then this area there, a little ridge here. And just puddle that in a little bit there. And fill this, and fill this area here also. move into those little holes here, like on this one. There's a little hole in the mesial right there. So we're going to fill that in. Puddle in this area. And then we will refine our grooves again. Make sure you don't make the grooves too straight. Straight grooves make for a very unnatural looking tooth. So the grooves are kind of randomized. So that's our lower. Now we're going to continue with the upper. We'll do a similar thing with the uppers. I'm gonna puddle in the areas where we can't fit in grooves or ridges. Where we can put in a ridge, we will. Just remember to control your heat. I'm gonna skip around so that I don't put hot wax next to hot wax, because that's how you run the waxes together. This one we can puddle in, there's not much room there. I'm just going to make a nice developmental groove. Here we can probably do a little secondary ridge. Here also. Let's see here. Nothing's getting in the way. Usually on the buckle of the maxillary, things don't tend to get in the way as much as the mandibular. So here are our little ridges. Now we're going to puddle in these areas right next to the ridges so that they look nice and smooth. We can even accent some of the ridges there. Nothing's in the way. So we continue with the linguals. Here it looks like we can have a nice ridge here. There's some room. Usually in this spot there's always a little more room than in other areas of the upper teeth, or the lower teeth for that fact. And sometimes on the linguals we have a little room too, like right here. Careful with that heat. Then the other side we'll just puddle in. Sometimes it looks better when you puddle them in, because if you don't have the room, you're just going to end up flowing everything together. And it's better to flow things together when you're in control, rather than by accident. So I can puddle in those little areas which are too open. Okay, so now we just go over it with the instrument a little bit. If we miss something, we can go back. Make sure that your articulator closes. And look at it, make sure that in the areas where there might be too heavy a contact, we take away and smooth it out again with the spatula. Make sure that that's what you hear. Now don't smash the teeth together because you'll break the wax, but just pay attention to both sides. Make sure that both sides are in good contact, but they're not smashing the cusps. We can just finalize the external shapes a little bit. Make sure that we have our marginal grooves. Many times people forget about the marginal grooves. Lingual shapes, everything. Your embrasures need to be on point so that the teeth look like they're separate. And this is our project. So if we go up a little closer, we see the contacts on this side. See the contacts on the other side. If you notice, we have some open areas right here, which we do need to close. So let's close those up. And we're gonna do that with a hot instrument. But first, we're going to very carefully just flow this there, just like that. And add a little bit of wax just to that area. Then we'll close the articulator. And make sure that our contacts are good. I can notice here that we need to smooth this out a bit more. Check the contact again. And we still need to add a little bit to that contact. That's why it's very important that we have these models articulated correctly. Now we have the right contact. Right there. So happy with that. And there's a little bit more of space right there, which we didn't close. I'm gonna close that right now. And there we go. It's closed. Everything sounds good. All the contacts are there, and let's do it.